Welcome, everyone, to this conversation from RedR Australia. My name is Josh Hallwright. Thank you for joining us. We are here to discuss civilians in conflict with two esteemed guests, Dr. Helen Durham, CEO of RedR Australia, and Hichem Khadhraoui, Executive Director for the Centre for Civilians in Conflict, CIVIC. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians on the land on which we are today, which is the Wurundjeri people of the nations. Pay my respects to elders past and present, acknowledge any First Nations colleagues joining us today, and recognize the sovereignty has never been ceded. So, Chen, welcome to Australia. This is your first visit.
Yes, indeed. Thanks a lot. It's my first visit to Australia. I'm very happy to be with you here.
Hichem, keen to hear your professional journey of the last 12 days.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. So my name is Hichem Khadhraoui. I'm the director of CIVIC. I've been working in the humanitarian field since the past 20 years. Originally, I am from North Africa. My mother from Algeria, father from Tunisia. And I arrived in France with my family in the 90s, following the civil war in Algeria and as well coup d'etat in Tunisia. So it was not the best moments to remain as kids. And I stayed 8 years in France. I did graduate from law. I did work, first of all, at the ICC, International Criminal Court, as a very young and very junior war crime investigator for indictment of Bashir for Sudan, for Bamba in Bonga for DRC. I was the first one with my colleagues to open the boxes of the Custody Commission. I remember that, 11 boxes, so sensitive at that time. And then I went straight after to the ICRC, where I spent 11 years. So 9 years in the field. I was working in countries such as Yemen, Iraq, Afghanistan, Somalia, Libya. I went to Guantanamo as well to visit the detainees there. I was in charge of the Al-Qaeda detainees fight for the CRC. I went as well to Yemen on rapid deployments missions. So yes, I did a bit of time there in these conflict zones, visiting detainees and as well trying to see how we can strengthen the protection of civilians. Then I finished at the ICRC as the head of protection of civilians. Then I went straight to an NGO called Geneva Call that engages armed groups on the promotional AHL. I was director of operations there. Then since 1 year and a half, I'm the director of CIVIC. About me, I am married. My wife is at the ICRC, and she's the HR director there. And we have 3 boys.
Thank you very much for making your way down to Melbourne and joining us today. Can you tell us a little bit more about the work at CIVIC?
CIVIC, I mean, to know more about CIVIC, I will just maybe give 2 minutes about the origin of CIVIC and the story of the founder of CIVIC. So her name was Marla Rosiska. She was a young US activist. And when the US went to Iraq in 2003 for the invasion of the country, she started to lobby a campaign to make sure that civilians that are being harmed during these operations are acknowledged and compensated by the US Army. So they had groups. She went to protest to the Congress because she realized that there was no inclusion of victims from US Army forces because they believed that it was a war to liberate Iraqis. Then she saw no results. She went to Iraq herself and trying to engage with widows of war and women who lost their husbands and brothers and sons because of the US, let's say, operations. And she went back to DC and she pushed for the first law that compensated victims of conflicts by US forces. Then she went back to Iraq 2 years after. She was 20 years old to provide compensation, military compensation. She got some funding for that. And she got killed by a roadside bomb at the age of 28 years old. And this really started as well the whole story about CIVIC, making sure that civilians that are harmed in conflict are not forgotten, they are being acknowledged, they are being protected, and as well compensated as well by the parties of conflict that are creating this harm. So CIVIC is all about making sure that civilian harm is being mitigated or not existing, of course, in conflicts. This is our vision, but it's really about the operationalization of protection of civilians, making sure that it is being concretely happening on the ground. So this is really the essence of CIVIC. Today, we are working in a wide numbers of countries. We are working in Ukraine, in Yemen, Syria, in Sudan, Nigeria, Sahel region, Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, the DRC, in Somalia as well, Nigeria. And we have global offices in Geneva, Brussels, New York, Washington, D.C., Nairobi, and Amman in Jordan. This is where we are located. What do we do on the ground, which is for us extremely important? First and foremost, we are here to support local communities to improve their safety and protection whenever there is a conflict happening. How we do it? We provide micro grants to support projects that they will develop to make sure that their safety is being enhanced. And I will give you 3 examples to maybe materialize that in a better way. In Ukraine, for example, we are supporting women groups that got together and are renovating, as we speak, bomb shelters and bunkers to make them child friendly because they could not access to these bunkers. And I went there myself with them on the front lines in Kharkiv because they are gloomy, they are dark. So with our support, they gave breastfeeding material to the bunkers, some toys, some books, some pillows to make the environment more conducive for the mothers and their children. Thanks to that, they started to use these bunkers and shelters when shelling were happening. So the safety has improved factually. Inside these bunkers, they started to speak about what happened to them and they saw the trauma. So they started to speak about their trauma. So we supported them in trauma healing discussions. And with that, they now started to have their own association and they go from one place to another place, speaking to other women, renovating the bunkers and doing trauma healing sessions within these renovated bunkers. So these bunkers, from being very green and dark places, became a place where children could be saved, being educated, and trauma could be shared among civilians. So one example that we have in Ukraine, another example that we have in Mali, we had as well communities that could not engage and share the protection concerns to the armies. They were afraid of speaking to them. So they asked us, could you support us in giving public speaking courses, leadership courses, how I can be more assertive and share my concerns to someone with weapons. It's not an easy thing to do. You can even try in the street speaking to a policeman, even in peacetime. It's not easy. You already have something. The uniform creates distance and fear. So by this engagement, by this support, they started to have much more assertiveness. They started to engage, and they could resolve a lot of issues. 3 months ago, for example, they started to push for having lights around paths that were from the village to the areas where they pick up wood and collect water. It was completely pitch black in the dark. So abuses, sexual harassment were happening, rapes. Thanks to their assertiveness, they could convince the authorities to put lights and having as well round of surveillance to make sure that the civilian population could go there safely and without harm. So these are the examples that we do with communities. The projects always come from themselves. We are here to support them in any ideas that they have, as long as it is here to improve their safety. And to finish as well on the ground, we do a lot of trainings with security forces, army, police. What we do when we engage with them is to make sure that civilian harm is reduced when they conduct operations, military operations. So we talk about the cost of making wars. We talk about the type of weapons they use. We talk about effects that certain weapons have when they do operations. And by having this engagement on the technical and pragmatic aspects, then it has direct impact on the civilian harm mitigation. One example is the Malian army. they used drones. But these drones were targeting civilians and destroying crops. So we sat with them in a closed door room like this one with a map, and our technical advisor spoke with the army, and we start to explain that by using drones in a forested area, so area with forest, you could not see what was behind because it was hidden. So they started to change the tactics and use different ways of doing operations and not having drones go hovering around forest and sending, the bombs. This reduced the harm to civilians because you didn't have drones anymore going in. They changed not because they want to please us, but we used the argument that by having civilian harm mitigation included in your operations, you improve your safety as a soldier, and you improve as well the acceptance by the civilians when you do operation. So it's all beneficial for you. This type of engagement that we have as well with them. And the third one on the ground, we create platforms of discussions where communities and security forces get together and share concerns, share protection needs, and find together joint solutions to improve safety on the ground on the concrete aspects. So in Yemen, they succeeded, not us, to open a road that was blocked by two armed factions because the communities came and started to negotiate when this road will be open and when it will be closed for security reasons, and find a kind of a calendar. So it became predictable, and it's not just, one day is closed, one day is open. So everyone knows that during these days, these hours, it's open, trucks could pass, and this eased really the life of the people on the grounds.
I think it's fascinating the putting into practice so many pragmatic, practical examples of protection of civilians, making it real and concrete. It's nice to get it down from a policy and conceptual space, making the abstract real. Helen, I'd like to turn to you now. Recently, we've had the Declaration for the Protection of Humanitarian Personnel launched. It's wide recognition that it's a fantastic initiative to do something very similar, making the concepts and abstract notions of protection very practical. Can you tell us a little bit about your perspective on the declaration?
Thank you very much. And I'm delighted to have my friend Hichem here because we've worked together with Geneva Call and other places. And if I may start from a RedR perspective, many of you online would know, and certainly in the room will know, we've got a new strategy. And in the center of our strategy is partnerships because we understand to do any of this work. And let's be honest, in this current environment, protecting humanitarian workers, protecting communities, protecting civilians, it's a heavy lift. You lift it almost against the tide, and no one can do it alone. So it's really great to have, and we're looking at doing partnerships together, which we can talk about later. But thank you, Josh, for mentioning the Declaration for the Protection of Humanitarian Workers. Now, there is a lot of legal framework, a lot of law and policy around this idea that we should protect everyone who's not participating in hostilities, but particular protection for humanitarian workers, because they are the ones that really force multiply the capacity for civilians to stay alive. When the rest of the infrastructure around is destroyed, when there's not enough hospitals or doctors or healthcare, or you can't communicate with each other, the humanitarian workers go in and do that job, mostly at a local level. I think we often think, at least here in Australia, that it's, fabulous RedR employees or Red Cross employees or others. But we do know, as you expressed, it's the local communities where humanitarian workers really often not only do the most work, but suffer the most atrocities. So Australia clearly wanted to do something in this space. I think the foreign minister, from practical examples herself of Australian who was killed in Gaza, wanted to put this topic on, I would say, on the tables of the highest conversations globally. And initially, when the declaration was proposed, there was a little bit of cynicism because we're living in times of cynicism where people saying, oh, it's just blah, blah, blah. It's just talking. It'll be a nice diplomatic thing. They'll sign it in New York. And as you said, Josh, it's had a lot of support. I think it's up to 130 states that have signed up to it, which is an extraordinary number. But what is really important is what is said and done there, because if we don't have declarations, if we don't have these sort of policy international legal documents, the conversations slip off the table. We don't have this raised globally. But I think for us in RedR, really importantly, we were able to talk to the Australian government in conjunction with Australian Red Cross and say, this is great politically at the diplomatic level, but we do, say, for example, heat training. We do training for humanitarians and development workers or many people going into complex environments, natural disasters, crises, you name it. But our courses, they're great, but I always talk about them as, and you'll get this from Geneva, they are the Mont Blanc pen of courses, right? They are high quality, 5 days, live in, very expensive, thousands of dollars. And I know myself, every time I was in places like Amman, local NGOs say, are sort of pleading, can we please do your course? But we didn't have the money to offer it to them. What we want to do and what we're going to do, we've got funding to do to add life to this declaration, is to create a 2-day HIT course or more of a personal security safety course, but do a shorter, sharper course that we can offer for free for particularly local NGOs across the globe, not just in our traditional places, but also in Africa, also in the Middle East, to really bring home the fact that they need this protection. And an exciting part, I think, about this program too, is that we will be doing a train the trainer, because everything we're trying to do, and this is why I love the work of CIVIC, it's genuinely located in the local. So, Josh, I hope that answers the question. I didn't go through the declaration, but it's a really great document. You can see it online. I highly recommend people have a look at it. But to me, what's exciting is bringing life to it and making sure it has an impact on the ground.
Thanks, Helen. It seems like there's quite a few very high-level initiatives now globally around protection of civilians, including the declaration, including the centrality of protection humanitarians. Really keen to hear more about what we could be doing across the organizations in partnership to enable further protection of civilians.
Thanks, Josh. No, I think this is a very important point, and thanks, Helen, for highlighting the important point of building life to frameworks. We are witnessing a rise of ethno-nationalism in a wide number of countries that are provoked by social economic crises, identity crisis. In Europe, for example, there is a will for social populations to go back to an era that was lost, and this creates tensions. Then you have the effects of climate change that creating massive displacement of people. So it's supposed to be really a factor of destabilization. The second aspect after this one is the fact that today in the world, the multilateral conflict resolution mechanisms are blocked. The UN Security Council is blocked. There have been any decision made by the Council since 3 years now. We have a P5 member that attacked its neighbor. It didn't happen before. P5 members used to wage wars, but for the first time ever, a P5 and a nuclear power, the large nuclear power, attacks its neighbors. And this changed the cards completely. So we don't have spaces to discuss and resolve conflicts through dialogue. And the third one, the consequence of it, is an increased militarization of states. In 2024, $2.7 trillion were spent on military spending. The total budget for humanitarian work globally is 35 billion. So just to show you the gap, for 2025, it will be more than last year. So what we have countries that don't have ways and means to resolve conflicts, say, pacific way. You have tensions inside the countries, and then you have more weapons available. So this, unfortunately, we may witness an increased number of conflicts using heavy weaponry to resolve conflicts. And who will pay the price? Civilians. And this is really important. And as you said, Helen, the frontline responders, the ones that are here to support the civilians being harmed, are even themselves being attacked. In 2024, over 300 humanitarian workers were killed. It's insane. I remember when I started working in this field 20 years ago, when you had 1 or 2 every year, it was a disaster. I remember we had operations stopped on the ground. It was a complete disaster. Now we talk about dozens and dozens being killed. And the ones that are really impacted the first are the local humanitarian workers. So this is where we need, and in terms of partnerships, and RedR and CIVIC are going to work on it together, is how we can make sure that these local workers are being protected and accompanied as well in their work. What we want as well CIVIC to put, let's say, the light on are the informal humanitarian workers, the ones that are falling into the cracks. You have the INGOs, you have the UN, you have the national NGOs, but what about the first line responders, the community workers? If Melbourne is attacked, there is a conflict, who will be responding? Not the ICRC, not the UN, the communities, the neighbors. You will be the first humanitarian workers to provide help and protection. So we need to protect you. We need to protect this category of people. Let's go and target these people, the ones that are not seen, the ones that are not formalized as an organization, but they still play a very important role. And security forces, with the army, with the police, because they are the ones on the ground to make sure that protection is being ensured. This is their primary duty, but they can as well cause harm. So how to make sure that they can be as well engaged and made aware, and more importantly, that their own rules of engagement includes the notion to protect humanitarian workers.
We're also seeing a situation where, because of new technologies, the general public is getting real-time exposure to atrocities, to the horrors, which can really make people and communities feel very disempowered, feel very scared, and in fact, they can withdraw. And when communities withdraw, they don't put pressure on the authorities to follow international humanitarian law, human rights law, or even basic norms of humanitarianism. So I think it's incredibly important to walk this fine line between not being naive and saying, there's laws, this is important. Because at the moment, you get a pushback of people saying, but what use are they? So we need to find a way to harness and make sure that people know that there are not only frontline workers, but there's also, say, deployees of RedR, there's work that CIVIC does, and many other organizations, and to instill some confidence that this is something we can address. It's about a lack of political will, and in many countries, not all, but in many countries, we can put pressure to create a different type of political will. So I think that's something to really think about, start educating and engaging with the communities that there is things we can do.
It's a very powerful message that we are able to change the narrative. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Hichem, Helen, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.